Adelaide Marston stood frozen in the middle of Lars Anderson Park on a Thursday afternoon in October. The cold wind pulled maple leaves down across the surface of the pond. Her 5-year-old son had just opened his mouth and spoken his first word in 2 years. Not to the team of million-dollar specialists she had assembled, not to the therapists who charged $400 an hour, to a stranger crouching before him, a sun-weathered palm cradling a single iridescent beetle. "Bug," Ethan said, his voice rough and scratched from disuse. Adelaide's knees buckled. 2 years, 12 specialists. Countless nights crying alone in the dark, and all it took was a stranger in the park. 2 years earlier, everything had been different. Ethan Marston had been a bright, curious 3-year-old who never stopped talking. He asked why the sky was blue. He asked why dogs wagged their tails. He asked why the moon followed the car at night. His grandmother, Harriet, adored him. On a particular Tuesday afternoon, she had picked him up from preschool while Adelaide finished a board meeting at Marston Media Group. The truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. His 18-wheeler crossed 3 lanes of traffic before slamming into the driver's side of Harriet's sedan. Ethan, strapped into his car seat behind his grandmother, watched as the impact threw her forward. He watched the blood pool beneath her silver hair. He watched her eyes close and stay closed. Emergency responders found him sitting in perfect silence, his small hand reaching through the gap between seats toward his grandmother's motionless body. Harriet survived. 3 surgeries. 8 months of rehabilitation. She walked again, spoke again, laughed again, though her left hip never fully recovered. But something in her grandson had broken in a way no surgeon could repair. The diagnosis came quickly. Selective mutism, triggered by severe psychological trauma. Adelaide consulted every expert money could buy. Speech-language pathologists from Boston Children's Hospital, child psychologists with waiting lists stretching years into the future. Play therapists who watched her son stack blocks in silence and build her like surgeons. 12 specialists in 24 months. None of them had broken through. Adelaide's husband, Preston Whitlock, grew increasingly impatient as the months stretched on. He was a venture capitalist who had married Adelaide partly for her sharp mind and partly for her family's media empire. What he had not bargained for was a son who refused to perform the basic social functions expected of a Whitlock heir. The final argument came on a Thursday night, 11 months after the accident. Adelaide had just returned from another fruitless therapy session when she found Preston packing a suitcase. "I didn't sign up for this," he said without looking at her. "I didn't sign up to raise a broken child." Adelaide felt something cold settle in her chest. "Get out," she said quietly. She got everything in the divorce. Preston got a generous settlement and visitation rights he never exercised. Adelaide got sole custody of a son whose eyes held entire conversations his mouth refused to release. She learned to read those eyes, the slight crinkle that meant happy, the downward cast that meant tired, the intense focus that appeared whenever he spotted an insect. Because somewhere in the silence of his trauma, Ethan had developed a fascination with bugs. He collected picture books about them. He watched nature documentaries with the volume muted. He spent hours in the backyard observing ants and beetles with scientific intensity. On a particular October morning, Adelaide made a decision. She canceled Ethan's 11 o'clock therapy appointment and drove to Lars Anderson Park instead. "Maybe you need Sky more than you need another doctor's office," she whispered as she unbuckled his car seat. Ethan looked at her with those expressive eyes. His face revealed nothing, but as they walked toward the park's winding paths, his small hand squeezed hers just a little tighter. Caleb Rayburn sat on a wooden bench, watching his 6-year-old daughter chase something through the fallen leaves. It was his day off from the custom furniture orders that paid their bills. Mira had auburn hair and gray eyes. She talked constantly. Today's obsession was insects. "Daddy, look," she called out, crouching near a massive oak. A small boy sat alone beneath the tree, motionless except for his eyes. The child appeared to be around 5. Well-dressed in clothes that probably cost more than Caleb earned in a week. But what caught his attention was the quality of the boy's stillness, the absolute containment of a child who had learned to make himself invisible. He watched as Mira approached the boy with her characteristic lack of restraint. "Hey, do you like bugs too? I'm Mira." The boy did not respond, but Caleb noticed something crucial. The boy's ear had twitched at the sound of Mira's voice. His breathing had changed. He was not deaf. He was choosing silence. Something stirred in Caleb's memory. A different life. a version of himself who had spent years learning to decode exactly this kind of withdrawal. Across the clearing, a woman sat on another bench, a laptop open on her knees. When she saw Mira approach her son, she started to rise, then paused, because her son, the boy who had not interacted with another child in 2 years, was not walking away. Mira sat down beside Ethan on the leaves and began to talk. "That's a really cool beetle. I think it's a June bug. My dad knows more about bugs than me." The boy's eyes lifted briefly, then returned to the beetle. Caleb walked slowly toward the children. He lowered himself onto the ground beside them, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who understood that sudden movements could shatter fragile moments. He picked up the beetle gently and cradled it in his palm. "This is a June bug," he said, his voice soft and unhurried. "Strange thing is, it's October. They usually disappear by September." The boy leaned almost imperceptibly closer. "See how the shell has this greenish-blue shine? They spend most of their lives underground, just larvae in the dark. Then, one summer, something tells them it's time to come up. Even if it's scary up here." Caleb extended his hand slowly. "You can hold it if you want." For a long moment, nothing happened. The October breeze rustled through the oak leaves. Then the boy reached out. His small fingers received the beetle, cradling it exactly as Caleb had done. He looked up. His eyes met the stranger's gray gaze directly. "Bug," he said. 10 feet away, Adelaide's laptop slid from her fingers onto the grass. She did not remember crossing the distance. She only knew that suddenly she was there, her designer slacks pressed into the dirt and leaves. When she finally managed to stand, she approached the stranger carefully. "Who are you? What do you do? I have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the best specialists in this country, and not one of them accomplished in 2 years what you just did in 10 minutes. Caleb glanced at his daughter, then back at Adelaide. "I used to be a speech-language pathologist," he said finally. "Before my wife died," the words hung in the autumn air. "I'm Adelaide Marston. That's my son, Ethan. He hasn't spoken in 2 years. Caleb Rayburn. This is Mira. Work with him." The words came out before Adelaide could stop them. "I'll pay whatever you ask." Caleb shook his head. "I don't do that work anymore. This isn't work. This is a chance. A second chance for my son." She paused. "And maybe for you." Mira tugged at her father's hand. "Daddy, can we play with Ethan more?" Caleb looked at his daughter, then at the boy, then at the desperate mother before him. "I won't take money, but if you want, we could meet here again. Same time next Saturday." Adelaide nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Before they left, Ethan walked to where Mira stood and held out his hand. In his palm sat the June bug. The gesture was unmistakable. A gift. The first thing he had willingly given to anyone outside his family in 2 years. Mira accepted the beetle with the solemnity of a child receiving a sacred trust. "Thank you. I'll take really good care of him." That night, Caleb could not sleep. He lay in the darkness of his bedroom, listening to Mira's soft breathing through the wall, and felt the past pressing against him like a physical weight. He had not thought about his old career in months, had trained himself not to think about it, because thinking about it meant thinking about Eleanor, and thinking about Eleanor meant drowning in a grief he had never learned to swim through. Finally, he rose and pulled a cardboard box from beneath his bed. Inside lay the artifacts of his former life, his master's degree from Boston University, his ASHA certification, a wedding photograph, Eleanor laughing in her white dress as he tried and failed to cut the cake, his hospital ID badge, Boston Children's Hospital, Speech-Language Pathology Department. Eleanor had died on a Tuesday evening driving to pick him up from that same hospital after a late shift. A drunk driver had run a red light at 40 miles per hour. She was pronounced dead on arrival in the emergency room where Caleb had spent years helping children find their voices. He had been filling out patient notes 3 floors up when it happened, completely unaware that his entire world was ending in the building's basement. He could not go back there, so he had quit, sold their house in Cambridge, bought a smaller place in Brookline with a garage he converted into a workshop, built furniture for children because it was the only way he could still use his hands to help them without confronting everything he had lost. Mira had been 2 when Eleanor died. She did not remember her mother clearly. She knew the stories, the photographs that covered their walls, the way her father sometimes paused mid-sentence when something reminded him of the woman they had both loved. Caleb put the box away and walked to his workshop. The smell of sawdust calmed him. He ran his hands over the rocking horse he was building for a client's daughter, feeling the grain beneath his fingers. The boy in the park had stirred something he thought was buried. Across town, in a house that could have contained 6 of Caleb's, Adelaide Marston sat in her home office conducting her own investigation. A search for Caleb Rayburn revealed a trail of articles from 4 years ago. Rising star at Boston Children's Hospital. Specialist in selective mutism. Then nothing. A complete disappearance from professional life following a brief obituary notice for Eleanor Rayburn, aged 32, survived by her husband Caleb and daughter Mira. Harriet Marston found her daughter still staring at the computer screen at midnight. The older woman moved carefully these days, her left hip never fully recovering from the accident that had stolen her grandson's voice. "You're researching him," Harriet said. It was not a question. Adelaide nodded. He was one of the best in his field. Then his wife died, and he just stopped. Harriet lowered herself into the chair beside her daughter. "You've spent 2 years trying to buy your way to a solution. Today, a man who has lost everything was able to reach Ethan when none of them could. I offered to pay him. He refused. Good." Harriet's voice carried hard-earned weight. "Some things cannot be purchased. This man has already lost his wife. He is raising his daughter alone. He gave up his career rather than face the place where his wife died. And despite all of that, he still has enough left inside him to help a stranger's child." She paused. "That is not an employee. That is something much rarer. A potential friend." Adelaide was quiet. "I don't know how to do that. I know how to negotiate contracts. I don't know how to just let something happen." Harriet smiled. "Then perhaps this is your opportunity to learn." That night, Adelaide sat beside Ethan's bed. But instead of singing, she told him about the June bug, how it lived underground for years before emerging into the light, how it had beautiful colors that changed when you looked at it from different angles. Ethan lay with his eyes open, watching her face. When she finished, he raised his small hand and touched his own lips. Then he reached out and touched her lips. It was not a word, but it was communication, a new kind of bridge across the silence that separated them. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm. Every Saturday afternoon, 2 families met at Lars Anderson Park. Caleb brought sandwiches from the deli near his workshop. Adelaide brought thermoses of hot cocoa that Ethan refused to drink, but Mira devoured. The children played, or rather Mira played, while Ethan observed with increasing engagement. Ethan's progress came in increments. Single words emerged slowly, offered exclusively to Mira, as if the 6-year-old girl were a safe harbor in waters too dangerous for adults. Leaf, bird, cold, and always, whenever he spotted one, bug. Caleb did not push. He understood from years of training that pressure was the enemy of progress in cases like Ethan's. The boy's silence was not defiant. It was a fortress he had built around himself after watching his grandmother nearly die. The walls would come down only when he felt safe enough to let them. Mira became an unconscious therapist, accepting her friend's limitations without question. She narrated their play constantly, filling the silence with stories and observations that required no answers. "Ethan wants to see the caterpillar," she would announce when the boy pointed at something. "Ethan thinks that cloud looks like a dinosaur." She translated his gestures into words. She gave voice to his silence without demanding that he speak for himself. The conversations between Caleb and Adelaide deepened gradually. She told him about Preston, about the shame of admitting the father of her child had called him broken and walked away, about the loneliness of running an empire while feeling completely powerless in the face of her son's suffering. Caleb told her about Eleanor, about the guilt of surviving when she had died driving to pick him up, about the terror of raising Mira alone, of being responsible for another human being when some days he could barely take care of himself. They discovered unexpected common ground. Both had built walls after their respective tragedies. Adelaide's were made of work and wealth. Caleb's of sawdust and solitude. Both had poured everything they had into their children because their children were all they had left. "I run a company with 2,000 employees, Adelaide said during their 4th Saturday meeting. "I've negotiated with senators. I've sued media conglomerates. Once I talked a hostile board into a complete reversal, but I can't help my own son say a complete sentence." Caleb watched Mira and Ethan examining something in the grass nearby. "You're helping him right now. Every time you're with him without demanding anything, you're telling him he's enough exactly as he is. That's not nothing. That's everything." Adelaide looked at him, really looked. and she saw something shift in her own expression, a crack in the carefully maintained walls. The moment was interrupted by her phone buzzing. She glanced at the screen, and Caleb watched the color drain from her face. "What is it?" Adelaide's voice came out hollow. "My ex-husband. He wants to see Ethan. His lawyers will be in touch. I thought he didn't want custody." "He didn't." Her hand trembled slightly as she put the phone away. "But apparently he's running for city council now, and a devoted father fighting to see his son makes a better campaign story than a man who abandoned his family." The storm broke 4 days later. Preston Whitlock appeared at Adelaide's office with a lawyer and a photographer. The latter allegedly for a profile in Boston Magazine, but obviously intended to document his performance as a caring father. He demanded visitation rights. He implied that Adelaide had been keeping Ethan from him. He used words like alienation and parental rights and best interest of the child, while his lawyer took notes and his smile never reached his eyes. Adelaide sat behind her desk and felt the old anger rising. The protective fury of a mother who had spent 2 years fighting for her child while this man contributed nothing but silence and a monthly check. "You called him broken," she said quietly. "You said you didn't sign up to raise a damaged child. I have witnesses. I have your own emails declining to attend his therapy sessions." Preston's smile flickered but held. "People say things they don't mean during difficult divorces. I've had time to reflect, to grow. Now I want to be part of my son's life. You want to use him for a photo opportunity. I want to be his father." Preston leaned forward, his politician's mask firmly in place. "And family courts tend to support a child's right to know both parents, even when one parent has been monopolizing access." That evening, Caleb brought Mira to Adelaide's house for the first time. Harriet had offered to watch the children while the adults talked. But the tension in the house was palpable. Ethan, sensitive to his mother's distress, had retreated into a silence even deeper than usual. He sat in the corner of the playroom with his arms wrapped around his knees, not even looking at Mira. Mira, with the intuition of a child who had navigated her own share of grief, simply sat down a few feet away and began quietly sorting through a box of toy cars. She did not try to engage him. She just made herself present, a steady companion in his storm. Caleb found Adelaide in the darkened living room, sitting alone on a couch that probably cost more than his entire workshop. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, sitting down beside her. Adelaide laughed without humor. "I know that. But knowing doesn't help when your child starts regressing because he can feel your fear." He stopped talking again, even to Mira, like the past 4 weeks never happened. "He stopped talking because he's trying to protect you." Adelaide looked at him sharply. "What?" "Ethan understands more than we give him credit for. He feels your anxiety, and in his mind, the way to help is to retreat, to make himself smaller, to not add to your burden." Caleb paused, choosing his next words carefully. "That's actually a sign of progress, in a strange way. He's responding to emotional cues. He's connected enough to you to want to protect you." Adelaide stared at him in the darkness. "How can you possibly know that?" "Because I've seen it before, in dozens of kids over the years." He hesitated. "And because it's what I did after Eleanor. I tried to make myself invisible because I thought my grief was hurting Mira. I thought if I could just contain it, keep it locked away, she wouldn't have to carry any of it. Did it work? No. Kids always know. They can't articulate it, but they know." Adelaide was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why are you helping us? You don't owe us anything. You barely know us." Caleb looked toward the playroom, where he could hear Mira softly narrating something to Ethan. "When I look at you with Ethan, I see Eleanor. How she would have fought for Mira, how she would have torn apart the world if anyone threatened our daughter." His voice caught slightly. "I didn't get to tell her how much I admired her strength, how grateful I was to have her as a partner in raising our child. She died before I could say any of it. Maybe helping you is my way of saying it now, of honoring who she was by being there for another mother who's fighting the same fight." Adelaide reached out in the darkness and took his hand. Neither of them spoke. The connection required no words. A week later, Caleb proposed something radical. "Bring Ethan to my workshop," he said during their Saturday park meeting. Sometimes busy hands help quiet mouths open. Adelaide hesitated. The workshop represented Caleb's private world, the sanctuary he had built after losing everything. Inviting them there felt significant in ways she did not fully understand. "Are you sure?" Caleb nodded. I've been thinking about it all week. There's something about working with wood, the focus required, the physical engagement. It takes the pressure off verbal communication because there's always something else to do with your energy. They went the following Thursday. Caleb's workshop smelled of sawdust and linseed oil, the scent of things being made rather than destroyed. Tools hung in neat rows on pegboard walls. Half-finished projects lined the workbenches, children's furniture in various states of completion. Mira immediately began showing Ethan around, pointing out her father's works in progress with proprietary pride. That's going to be a rocking horse, and that's a bookshelf shaped like a tree. Daddy makes the best stuff. Caleb set the children up at a low workbench with a simple project. A wooden box for collecting insects, 4 walls, a floor, a lid with a mesh window. He showed them how to sand the pieces smooth, guiding their small hands over the wood. For an hour, the workshop filled with the sounds of sandpaper on pine and Mira's constant chatter. Ethan worked in silence, but his silence was different now. Engaged rather than retreated. Present rather than protected. Then came the moment that would change everything. Ethan needed a piece of wood that Mira was using. He reached for it, then stopped, looked at Caleb, looked at Mira. His mouth opened and closed. Mira, his voice cracked on the name. Please. Both adults froze. Adelaide, standing in the doorway, pressed her hand against her mouth. 2 words, a complete thought, a sentence, the first in over 2 years. And it was a request, an expression of want, a reach toward connection rather than retreat from it. Mira handed over the wood as if nothing remarkable had happened. Here you go. I was done with it anyway. But Caleb saw Adelaide's shoulders shaking. She turned away to hide tears she could not control. That evening, the 4 of them sat on the workshop floor, eating pizza from boxes balanced on sawhorses. Sawdust covered their clothes. Ethan had wood shavings in his hair. For the first time, it felt like something none of them had expected, and all of them desperately needed. It felt like family. A few days later came an unexpected call. Dr. Helen Ainsley, Caleb's former mentor at Boston Children's, had heard about Ethan's progress through professional networks. Her voice on the phone was warm but precise. You've essentially created a new therapeutic modality without meaning to, combining occupational therapy principles with speech-language pathology in a naturalistic setting. The woodworking provides sensory engagement and reduces performance anxiety. The presence of a peer removes the adult pressure dynamic. It's brilliant, Caleb. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't planned. I just did what felt right. The best therapeutic innovations rarely are planned. They emerge from authentic human connection. Helen paused. I want you to consider something. A research collaboration. Documenting your methods. Studying outcomes. Potentially developing a reproducible program for other children with selective mutism. Caleb did not answer immediately. The offer represented everything he had walked away from 4 years ago. I'll think about it, he said finally. When he told Adelaide about the call, she did not push. She only said, you don't have to decide now. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in late November. Adelaide arrived at the Norfolk County Probate Court with her lawyers, her mother, and a quiet terror that no amount of professional preparation could fully address. Preston had mounted a convincing public campaign over the preceding weeks. Local news had run sympathetic features about the successful businessman fighting to reconnect with his estranged son. Nobody mentioned that the estrangement was entirely his choice. Caleb sat in the gallery with Mira. Their presence was a silent statement of support. Adelaide had not asked them to come. They had simply shown up that morning, Mira in a pressed cotton dress that Caleb had ironed at 6 a.m., neither of them complaining about the early hour. The proceedings unfolded with excruciating slowness. Preston's lawyers painted a picture of a devoted father unfairly excluded from his son's life. They produced character witnesses who testified to his reformed priorities. A pastor, a business partner, a childhood friend, each one carefully coached. They suggested that Adelaide's demanding career had left her unable to provide adequate attention to a special needs child. Then Adelaide's lawyers presented their evidence. Emails from Preston declining to participate in Ethan's therapy. Text messages calling his son damaged and broken. Financial records showing he had never once voluntarily increased his child support despite his substantial income. Testimony from the therapists he had refused to meet. The chronology was devastating in its precision. The turning point came when the judge asked to hear from Ethan himself. A child psychologist had been appointed to facilitate the conversation, to translate if necessary, to ensure the boy was not pressured or coached. Ethan sat in a small chair that made him look even younger than his 5 years. His eyes found his mother in the courtroom. Then they moved to the gallery, where Caleb and Mira sat together. Mira waved very slightly. Ethan blinked once, the way he did when he wanted to wave back but was not yet sure he had permission. The psychologist asked gentle questions. Did Ethan understand why they were there? Did he have anything he wanted to share? For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Adelaide felt her heart fracturing with every second of silence. This was it. Her son would retreat into his protective shell, and the judge would see only a child too damaged to express a preference. Then Ethan spoke. "I want to stay with Mommy." His voice was soft but clear. The courtroom went absolutely still. "And Mira, and Mr. Caleb." Preston's face went pale. His carefully constructed narrative crumbled in the space of 3 short sentences. His son, the child he had called broken, had found his voice just long enough to reject him completely. The judge ruled in Adelaide's favor. Sole custody remained with the mother. Visitation would be available only if Preston completed a parenting course and demonstrated sustained interest in his son's therapeutic progress. Given his track record, everyone in the courtroom knew this meant visitation would never happen. In the courthouse hallway afterward, Adelaide found herself surrounded by lawyers offering congratulations and journalists requesting comments. She ignored them all, pushing through the crowd to where Caleb stood, holding Mira's hand. She did not speak. She simply wrapped her arms around him and held on, trembling with relief and exhaustion and something else she was not ready to name. Caleb's free arm came up slowly and rested on her back. He did not say anything. He understood that some moments do not need words to mean what they mean. Mira tugged at her father's jacket. "Does this mean we can keep playing with Ethan?" Caleb laughed, the sound rough with emotion. "Yeah, sweetheart, I think it does." In the weeks that followed, new possibilities began to emerge. Adelaide made changes. She promoted her chief operating officer to president and stepped back from day-to-day management of Marston Media. The company would survive without her constant attention. Her son needed her presence more than her employees needed her oversight. The board accepted the transition with surprising grace, though a few of the older members made knowing comments about how motherhood softened even the sharpest minds. Adelaide ignored them. She had stopped caring about the opinions of men who had never been responsible for keeping a child alive. "I spent 2 years trying to fix Ethan like he was a broken acquisition," she admitted to Caleb during one of their now daily conversations. "Throwing money and experts at the problem, I never considered that what he needed most was simply more of me." Caleb faced his own decision. Helen Ainsley had called a second time. The research collaboration was real. It would help many children. He sat in his workshop one evening looking at the rocking horse he was finishing for a client. Mira was asleep upstairs. 4 years ago, he had abandoned the profession because he could not return to the place where Eleanor died. But maybe Helen was offering a different path, not Boston Children's itself. Research, training, a program that would teach others to do what he had done naturally with Ethan. The next day, he told Adelaide at the park, their familiar bench. She listened without interruption. "What will you do?" "I think I'll say yes. Part-time. I still want the workshop. I still want the Saturdays." Adelaide nodded. "You deserve to come back. On your own terms." Caleb looked at her. "You helped me realize I still have something to give. I thought that part of me was buried with Eleanor." Adelaide placed her hand on his on the bench. The first time, not in darkness, not through crisis, just November light and a decision. Behind them, Ethan and Mira ran up together, holding a caterpillar. Ethan held it up. "Mom, look, caterpillar." 2 words. Adelaide knelt down. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Mira explained to Ethan that the caterpillar would become a butterfly. "It's like it changes into something else, but it's still it." Ethan thought about this. Then he said, "Like us." Adelaide looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them cried. They simply stood there. In the moment, a 5-year-old had just articulated what 3 adults could not. That night, on the drive home, Mira asked her father, "Daddy, is Ethan's mom still sad?" Caleb thought about it. "Less than she was, sweetheart." "Good. Because I like Ethan, and I like Miss Adelaide, and I think Mommy in heaven likes them too." Caleb did not believe in heaven in the literal sense, but he did not correct his daughter. There were things a 6-year-old said, and you simply received them. He reached back over the seat and squeezed her small hand. She squeezed back. They drove the rest of the way home in companionable silence. Spring came to Boston with its usual dramatic flourish. Winter's grip released suddenly into warmth and blooming trees. 6 months had passed since that first encounter at Lars Anderson Park. Caleb and Adelaide sat on their familiar bench, watching their children play in the distance. Caleb had begun his collaboration with Helen Ainsley. 2 days a week at a new Boston Children's satellite office in Brookline, he had chosen it deliberately, the satellite rather than the main hospital where Eleanor had been pronounced dead. He still kept the workshop, still made rocking horses and tree-shaped bookshelves. Sometimes he came home with sawdust in his hair and clinical notes in his bag. He found, to his surprise, that the two halves of his life no longer felt at war. Ethan's vocabulary had expanded dramatically. He spoke in full sentences now, though still primarily to Mira. With adults, he remained cautious, but the fortress walls had become permeable. Words escaped more frequently. Smiles appeared without warning. He had even laughed twice, a sound Adelaide had begun to fear she would never hear again. Mira grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him toward something in the grass. A moment later, Ethan came running back, breathless with excitement. "Mom, Mr. Caleb, look what we found." He opened his palm to reveal a beetle with an iridescent green-blue shell. A June bug, appearing right on schedule this time as spring tilted toward summer. "It's back," Ethan announced, his face bright with wonder. Adelaide and Caleb exchanged a look. Some things that seemed lost forever found their way back. Voices silenced by trauma. Hearts closed by grief. Lives that had seemed permanently diminished, discovering they still had room to grow. "Bug," Ethan said softly, staring at the creature in his hand. Then he looked up at his mother, at the man who had become so much more than a stranger in a park, at the girl who had become his best friend and his bridge back to the world. "I love you." 3 words. A complete sentence. A declaration that held the weight of 2 years of silence finally broken. Adelaide pulled her son into her arms, tears streaming down her face. Caleb's hand found her shoulder, steady and warm. Mira, refusing to be excluded from the moment, threw herself into the embrace, nearly knocking them all over. 4 people tangled together on the spring grass of a Boston park. A family built not from blood or marriage, but from something perhaps more durable. From loss that became connection. From silence that became speech. From strangers who became exactly what each other needed. Above them, the descendants of that first June bug hummed in the warming air, emerging from underground darkness into spring light. Later, after Mira and Ethan had run off to chase a butterfly, Caleb and Adelaide sat together on the bench, shoulder against shoulder. "Do you remember that first Saturday?" she asked. "I remember I hadn't planned to sit down. I walked past first. Then I came back." "Why?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Because you were crying, and you didn't know you were crying." Adelaide turned to look at him. For the first time, she placed her hand over his on the bench in a way that could not be mistaken for friendship. He did not pull his hand away. He did not squeeze it either. He simply let her hand rest there. They did not talk about the future. No declarations, no promises. Just another Saturday, and then another, measured in the bugs Ethan found and the sentences he added. Helen Ainsley would later write a paper about what she called the Rayburn method, a protocol for sensory engagement in pediatric selective mutism. Caleb refused to be listed as primary author. "The child did it," he said. "I just sat next to him." The paper would help dozens of children in the first year alone. Therapists across the country wrote to Caleb asking for training. He answered each one personally. He kept the Saturdays open. Marston Media continued to grow under its new president. Adelaide was present for the major decisions, absent for the rest. She had dinner hours with her son. She had Saturday mornings at the park. She slept through full nights for the first time in 2 years. Preston Whitlock lost the city council race. Internal stories about his parenting record had leaked, not through Adelaide, but through his own political opponents. He moved to Chicago. No one heard from him again. Harriet Marston lived long enough to hear her grandson call her grandma in a complete sentence. She told Adelaide one evening, "I've been forgiven." Adelaide held her mother. "You never needed forgiveness. You were a victim, not a perpetrator." Harriet cried then, the first time since the accident. The guilt she had carried for 2 years, the conviction that she had failed to protect the child she loved most, finally loosened its grip. Adelaide held her until she was done. A Saturday in May the following year, the park was full of cherry blossoms. 4 people walked around the pond. Ethan walked between Caleb and Adelaide. Mira ran ahead. On the path behind them, 4 sets of footprints. Not 2 separate pairs, 4, side by side. Some things that break can still be mended. Some silences can be filled. Some people who arrive as strangers become the family you were always meant to find. And sometimes all it takes is a single word. Boo.